Just to finish Senator Blumenthal's point, I hope you realize how ridiculous the four of you look. Spouting these preposterous, canned answers in a forum in which A, you're supposed to tell the truth, and B, you're supposed to demonstrate the judicial capacity to make independent, factual decisions in hard cases. If you can't even sit here and say that Joe Biden won that election or that the Capitol was attacked, what's left? What's left if a hard case comes your way as a judge, and let's say the Trump administration is bearing down on that? Why would we ever believe that you would give the litigants a fair hearing and a fair decision if the executive branch was leaning in on you when we can't get a reasonable answer out of any of you?
Four people sitting in front of the United States Senate refused to say Joe Biden won the 2020 election. These are not fringe social media accounts. These are Trump's nominees to become federal judges, people who want lifetime appointments to decide your rights, your freedom, your future. And they sat there and gave scripted non-answers to avoid offending the administration that nominated them. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been sounding the alarm on judicial independence for years. He spent the last year writing letters, making floor speeches, and demanding answers from the U.S. Marshals Service about who is actually behind the wave of threats targeting federal judges. The Marshals have stonewalled him over 20 times, and now, in this hearing room, he's watching nominees who want to be those judges perform the exact same kind of capitulation, on camera, under oath. The question he asked wasn't partisan, it was simple. If you can't give honest answers when the executive branch wants you to dodge, why would anyone believe you'll give honest rulings when the executive branch wants you to comply?
Let me ask a different question, a legal question. A judge, you want to be judges. A judge gets a threat to the judge's life or to the judge's family. Can you imagine a scenario in which liability may attach to individuals beyond the utterer of that threat? Ms. Clark?
Senator, as a prosecutor, there are instances where there's some responsibility that is assigned to someone who is not the utterer of a threat to an individual. And so to answer your question, yes, I can imagine.
You agree?
Yes, Senator, and if confirmed to the bench, I would follow all Supreme Court precedent and Ninth Circuit precedent.
Mr. Rick, you agree?
Yes, Senator, I would agree with that.
I don't know that I care what you think, Ms. Westerkamp, because you're going to international trade and you're probably not going to see much of this, but do you agree?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, and those doctrines that would provide the legal basis for investigation in those scenarios would include doctrines like, name one, Ms. Clark.
Senator, doctrines that are, if someone is essentially carrying out
solicitation, would that be
yes.
one? Solicitation of a
Yes.
threat?
Yes.
Or a conspiracy out of which the threat emerged, would that be another one?
Yes.
Lie. What you just watched was a senator teaching a law school class to people who want to be judges, and using their own answers to set a trap they won't fully understand until this video goes viral. Whitehouse walked them through solicitation, conspiracy, RICO. They agreed with each doctrine, and then he revealed why he asked. The U.S. Marshals Service, which reports to a DOJ run by MAGA loyalists, has refused over a dozen times to confirm it will investigate beyond the person who physically makes a threat against a judge. Think about what that means. Someone calls in a death threat against a federal judge. The Marshals investigate that one person. They stop there. They don't ask who organized it. They don't ask whether it's part of a pattern. They don't ask whether it was solicited, coordinated, or enterprise-driven. Every doctrine these nominees just agreed was valid, ignored. The reason Whitehouse believes they stopped there is that following the thread leads back to right-wing networks, and this DOJ would rather leave judges exposed.
Criminal law.
So here's why I asked you these questions. I asked you these questions because right now federal judges are under the worst shadow of physical threat in my lifetime and perhaps in the history of this country. And in responding to those threats, we have the United States Marshals Service, which reports to the Department of Justice. And I have now over a dozen times asked the Marshals Service, will you investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence justifies it? That's a super easy question. The answer is, yeah, of course we will. They won't answer that. They won't answer that. And I point this out because judges across the country need to pay attention to the fact that the Marshals Service won't confirm that it will investigate behind the utterer of a threat if the evidence supports that.
Then go there. That stonewalling isn't accidental. Whitehouse has now publicly stated he's asked the Marshals and DOJ over 20 times, whether they will investigate for orchestration behind threats to judges. No answer. Every time. Meanwhile, the threat environment is the worst in living memory. In fiscal year 2026, 129 different sitting federal judges have already been named as threatened in protective investigations, and we're not even halfway through the year. Threats against judges have doubled in 3 years. The federal judiciary was so alarmed it established its own Judicial Security and Independence Task Force. Senate Democrats introduced legislation to strip the marshals entirely from executive branch control and move it under the federal judiciary itself, because the conflict of interest is that obvious. You have an agency whose job is to protect judges from threats, controlled by an administration that has publicly targeted those same judges for impeachment, called them corrupt, and whose officials reportedly told DOJ lawyers to tell courts to go to hell. These nominees want to sit on those benches. They just told you they're not willing to give honest answers when the executive branch is bearing down. Why would anyone expect them to rule differently?
And why would that be the case? That would be the case because when you get behind the utterer of a lot of these threats, you run into right-wing conspiracies. And this MAGA Department of Justice would rather not go there. And so they leave judges exposed with investigations in which they aren't doing investigative 101 work that you've all identified as plausible legal theories.
Once confirmed. Here's the full picture. 4 nominees sat in that room and refused to acknowledge documented historical reality. Not because they don't know it, because they were told not to. Senator Whitehouse called that out not to score political points, but because it's a direct preview of how these people will behave if they're confirmed to the bench and the Trump administration leans on them in a case. At the same time, the agency responsible for protecting federal judges from physical violence won't tell the Senate whether it investigates who's behind those threats. Judges across this country, appointed by both parties, are operating under the worst threat environment in memory. Their families are being targeted, and the enforcement arm that's supposed to protect them is controlled by the same political apparatus that's been publicly targeting those judges for removal. That's not a coincidence. That's a system. Nominees who won't answer basic questions. An enforcement agency that won't follow basic investigative procedure. An administration that calls judges corrupt while refusing to investigate who's sending them death threats. Whitehouse put it plainly, when you follow these threats back far enough, you hit right-wing networks. And this DOJ isn't going there, so federal judges sit exposed. And 4 new nominees are about to join the bench, having already demonstrated they'll look the other way when pressure arrives. Stay informed, share this. And if you think judicial independence matters, because it's the last check standing, hit subscribe. The next hearing is coming.